This recording was funded by the European Union. Its contents are the sole responsibility of Man to Man podcast and do not necessarily reflect the views of the European Union. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Man to Man. I'm your host, Hugo Ribatika. When we talk about sexual abuse, the majority of cases that we often discuss or pick up on in the media are of those of the female orientation or women in particular. I mean, those numbers are astronomical, 12, 13,000 in South Africa every single quarter. Well, the conversation today is slightly different. As you know, Man to Man is about the conversations that men should be having but aren't. Studio guests with me, Sechaba Motsiola. Sechaba, thanks so much for joining us on Man to Man.
Thank you.
And speaking to us from Mitchell's Plain via our Zoom link is Andre Scaffers. Andre, thanks so much for coming onto the program.
Thank you, viewers, for allowing me this opportunity to say my story too. Really looking forward to it.
Sechaba, let's start the conversation in studio. And when we talk about gender-based violence or sexual violence, what comes to mind for you?
I think when you started the conversation, you spoke about the fact that it seemed to really be men, I guess, as the perpetrators and women as the victims. But what one is aware of is that the conversation is nuanced and is a little bit more complicated. It affects both men and women. I guess the emphasis that's put on the media and the statistics at the moment tends to talk more about what happens to women and men being the perpetrators. So from a man-to-man conversation, he's trying to widen that lens so that we have a more holistic conversation because one affects the other. So that's where my starting point will be.
So Andre, let's come to you and obviously your story, which is incredibly important to this conversation. Walk us through your journey of deciding to break the silence about your experience as a sexual abuse victim.
It happened about, say, 3 years ago. Just about January month, yes. A very good friend of mine actually passed away on the 19th of Jan. And my son was very close to him. He was my son's football coach. And I also had my eldest son, who was at the time, he was about 16, 17 years old. So the night when my friend passed away, I went to my son's room, the younger one, and I went to his room to go look for him to see how he's doing because this close friend of ours passed away. And I didn't find him in his room. And upon going to his brother's room, I found him in his brother's bed. And for some reason, it triggered me. In fact, I didn't even know the word trigger up until that day. And I was so angry for the fact that I found my son in his brother's bed that I literally snapped and wanted to beat my son up. And he did absolutely nothing wrong. It was that morning when I went on to Google and I searched for rape crisis. I searched for rape crisis. Where can I talk to somebody? Because it was that morning that I realized that I was dealing with demons of my own that I never dealt with. And when I saw that, I immediately got the flashback of what happened to me 30 years ago. And amazingly, I honestly hid that thing for 30 years. And I didn't even mention it to my mom or my wife or anybody else for that matter. And I went to a rape crisis and I spent 6 months there going through counseling. I'm still going for counseling up until this day because it's something that I'm hoping that would go away. But I realize that it's a process, a long process.
Now, Andre, you talk about a trigger and the fact that you didn't know it was a trigger, but when you saw your younger son in his older brother's bed, it triggered something. Did you have a conversation with your two boys? Did they understand what was going on, either then or at a later stage?
No, they didn't. Obviously, they didn't because, like I said, I never even spoke to my wife nor to my mother about it. So for 30 years, that was my and the perpetrator's secret. Nobody knew about it. So it was only in counseling that I was told, look here, you need to open up and speak about it because if you don't deal with this thing, it's gonna somehow deal with you. And like I said, I'm still in the process of going counseling. It was only about 4 or 5 months ago where I eventually set my family down, wife and children, and said with them what happened with me. And in a way, I could also tell I've got an 8-year-old daughter, look here, this is the reason why I'm so overprotective, not only over you, but also I realized that while my sons grew up, I never allowed them to have like sleepovers. I never want sleepovers at my place because of what happened. And you would hide it in your mind unknowingly because you don't even realize that that thing that happened when I was only 7 years old played such a huge part in my entire life that many things in my life was actually built around what happened when I was 7. And even though I tried to hide it and basically forget about it, it basically saved my life.
Now, before we bring the conversation to Sechaba, I'd like to find out about the level of support that you got from your family when you talk to them about your past and the challenges that you'd obviously faced.
You know, the amazing part is that we actually have a, like we call a prayer meeting every Wednesday at home. And I spoke to a few people and I told them, look here, I think I'm ready to tell my wife and my children, but I'm going to do it on Wednesday evening. And as because it's something that I've been delaying for quite a few months. And the Sunday morning, somebody stood up in church also and spoke about being raped when she was a little girl. And I remember saying to myself, no man, it's too soon. I'm not going to speak to them yet. But then somebody that I said I'm going to speak to my family on Wednesday reminded me the Wednesday morning and said, good luck, Andre, I'm praying for you. And it was that made me realize I can't turn back on my word because I said I'm going to speak to my family tonight and I would like to keep my word. And it was the most difficult thing ever. After I spoke to my wife and children, I remember clearly my little daughter came and she stood next to me. Oh, get emotional now. And she stood next to me and then she hugged me and it was like she assured me, Daddy, you're gonna be okay, man. And at that moment, I knew that I'm gonna be all right because it was like they could understand me a little bit more, knowing why I did what I did. I'm not trying to justify what I did when I raised them the way I did, but in a way, it like brought something to perspective for them. That is why you are the way you are. I never abused my wife. I never abused my children. But I was just very strict with many things, didn't allow them certain things because of what I went through as a child.
So, Chaba, let's pick it from that narrative that we've just heard from Andre. Now, what stops a man, or what causes a man to keep a secret like this for so long?
Yeah, I think we will ask Andre again what it felt like once the secret is out, because there's something that society does to you as a man. It sets certain expectations that no matter what you go through, you must hold it in, be a man, no matter how vulnerable and fragile you are as a man. Through your experiences, society almost expects you to be a man and not to be weak. So sometimes that type of pressure that is exerted by society on a man, you end up not really dealing with yourself and aligning to what you are and what you feel. And also the shame to say, if I do speak up, how is society going to receive my truth? Because they might lace it with something else and say, maybe you are looking for attention, maybe you are exaggerating, maybe you want to insert yourself in the narrative when women are actual victims. And all those things make it quite difficult for men to come through and tell their story. That's why when you have a platform that allows men-to-men conversations, it's in these forums that men are able to open up. But also men need to be willing to receive a conversation like the one that we are having without judging, without looking down on the other men and say, you went through that, it makes you less of a man. And men might not necessarily also be ready for that conversation.
Now, Andre, you mentioned that for the last 6 months, or it's been 6 months since you started going for therapy. Has the opening up to this trauma that you endured so many years ago helped in that healing process?
Yes, I can definitely say that. And like, okay, so now it's the whole thing about same. For some reason, I was 7 years old. And for some reason, you still feel the same. The counselor has to tell me in every session, it's not your same. You were 7 years old. You didn't do anything wrong. And for the first 3 months, I just didn't understand what she was saying, because you're telling me it's not my same, but yet I feel same. I feel dirty. I feel as if, like he also said, I wanted it, and I was only 7 years old. So there's a lot of mixed emotions, and by speaking up, especially to my family, it the night I did it, it felt like a ton of bricks was lifted from my shoulders, just by saying the words that I was raped, I was sexually abused. Because even going to the police station, you must know that at this age, to go lay criminal charges, because I went and I laid criminal charges. I laid criminal charges for it. And to go into a police station to say, look here, this happened to me. As a young man now, it still feels shameful.
So going to the police station, was that part of the closure that you were seeking? Is this individual still in your life? Is he going to be prosecuted, or is it someone that you'll never make contact with again?
The reason why I was so triggered with my sons was because it was my brother, my half brother, and somebody that I'm obviously still in contact with, and the fact that he's denying it makes it worse. I didn't want to press charges. I didn't want to go to the police station. The only thing I wanted from was to admit what you've done. For some reason, I thought that would help me with my healing process. Easily in front of one witness, he did admit it. Now, I was 7, he was 15 at the time, which means he was also a young. And in the first meetings, he said, look here, it happened to me also when I was a child, and somebody did it to me. And maybe justified it, that's why he's doing it to others or to me. Ever since that, he denied it ever happened. And that to me is why I'm looking for justice. Also, see there's no change behavior. That is for me the worst. That to see now, years later, that this man is still using sex as a weapon against others. And that is what actually drove me to go charges, just to see that my brother is still doing these things. And yeah.
So Chaba, you have a lot of dealings with men, and obviously come into contact with many individuals who've gone through this sort of trauma. Is getting this individual arrested, this perpetrator, incarcerated, if you will, does that contribute to the healing process? How do you find that men deal or should deal with this?
Yeah, I guess within the framework of the law, one always has to use all the instruments available to be able to find closure. And in this case, if one is to be held accountable and the victim still feels that will be part of their own healing, it becomes quite an important part. Remember, within the society, the way society sometimes deals with trauma that men go through, especially in this particular case where there's close relations, it just destabilizes the family setup, and you may even find other members of the family being uncomfortable with what is opening up, and also there might even be victims that have been silent within the family setup in this case, who might actually be saying, now you have opened a can of wounds, and they might not even be ready themselves perhaps to come forward. The other thing around the healing process, it has to be an individual journey. We don't know where it starts, how long it takes. It's just allowing somebody to find different avenues to continue their healing journey. Punishment, yes, it's one part of it, but I think what was said says sometimes it's just the acknowledgement that I did something wrong, I hurt somebody, and I've scarred them for life, and in the process I've altered how they relate with society, and just sometimes taking that responsibility might help the conversation. Also remember, here we are really talking about a family man. If I'm just using a very specific organization, a situation where from a family, it also changes the family dynamic, as we said, to say there was this thing that was sitting here. Now that it's gone, the family itself has to orientate themselves and see you anew, but still love you as the father, protect you, and also make sure that at any point in time, if you are feeling support, that they are there for you. But at the same time, you may feel that I've put a burden again on my family around my story. And all those dynamics as part of, I guess, therapy is what one will continue to go through. But this is a story that perhaps happens to many men. But the reason why we don't hear stories like this is because people are not ready and there are no triggers, I guess. And it's through the sharing of brave stories like this that somebody sitting somewhere might find today as a trigger to start opening up and perhaps then being able then to continue their journey. So there are different routes to the healing. And I also appeal to women specifically when a man becomes vulnerable, when a man is going through their process, for them to play their part and have empathy and be able to be sympathetic to the process that somebody goes through. Because sometimes women may not necessarily also have that empathetic ear. And we don't talk about that often.
Yeah, but I think the real issue that men, and Andre, you'll confirm this, that men don't talk is not because women will laugh at us, it's because other men potentially will look at us strangely. Andre, from your own example, you've talked to us about the support of your family. You indicated that your daughter came and hugged you when you made that announcement, and that your family's been there for you. So those around you are offering you support. So what about the other men in your life, your friends, your colleagues, workmates, people maybe in your community that may have come across this story? What has their reaction been?
I listened now to him as he spoke, and that was the first thing. We are four brothers, and how this thing has divided us as brothers now, because I've got one brother that supports my brother. Obviously, it's a loved one. You are torn between two brothers, so it's like me going into a closet and airing the family's dirty laundry in public now. So why would one do this? And so it is very, very difficult. That was actually the reason why I support the family, because he sent the message to my other brothers and he told them, look here, this is what Andre is saying. I never did anything, but as soon as the case is over, then everybody's gonna hear the truth. And then I built up the courage to tell my brother, because of all my brothers, I only told one. And then I told my brother, look here, this is what he's saying, but this is what's happened. So you have to make up your own mind who you want to believe. So this whole thing has now divided brothers. It has, in a way, my mother, before she passed away, came and she cried and she said, Andre, was I such a bad mom to you that in 30 years you never told me this, that in 30 years I never knew this happened to you. So I understand, I'm not trying to justify it. I understand why men struggle to talk because of the stigma of society and the things attached to it. But I also see now with this whole thing about mental, we always say to people, why didn't you say something when we hear of people that committed suicide or done something? So that is why I'm speaking out because I'm hoping that by me speaking out, I would also encourage another man because um, talking helps actually. I'm not saying that everybody should go and air their family's dirty laundry in public. But what I'm saying is that find yourself someone that you can trust and that you can talk to. I've since spoken to two of my friends that's been very supportive. Still, it's not something that you want to share with anybody or everybody. It's something that you must trust people enough to share it with them. But this is my second live interview that I'm doing now, and the more I feel I'm doing it, the more it helps me because, like I said earlier, if I could only help one man to say, look here, man, I was the victim, and I did nothing wrong. The fact the counselor can now tell me it is not your same. I'm starting to believe it now.
What's coming out of that conversation that strikes you the most?
I think it's about being brave and knowing that you can only control yourself. How other people then react, you cannot control that. So the inner work that one does, taking control of that for me becomes quite important because at the moment, as Andre was saying, relating the story, he was not in control of how other people will interpret it. So I think owning one's narrative is very important in this particular case because it's your truth, your experience, and how other people choose to change or make other people see it. You can't control that. For as long as one is true to themselves, becomes quite key. And I think for me also, it's about timing. There's never the right time. The right time is at a time that you tell your story. Maybe 30 years ago was the right time for Andre to tell the story, but it didn't happen 30 years ago. Society possibly was not ready to have a conversation as deep as this particular one. And at this moment, it is the right time. As he had just said, the support, the dynamics are quite different. So for me, it's about the time that you are ready. Your story, you have to tell it yourself.
So, Andre, let's talk about the men and women out there who have sons like you, sons 30 years ago who might have been 7 years old at the time. What are the things that we need to look out for? Is it the constitution of the family that would prevent a child from going out and saying, mom or dad or whomever it is that's looking after them, this is what has happened to me? Was a construct of your family back then one of the factors that kept this hidden? Was it embarrassment? Do you remember what it was that stopped you from telling what had happened, describing this abuse at the time that it happened?
You see, at the time that it happened, our families wasn't like, our mom was there, she loved us a lot. Our mother passed away 2 years after it happened. So I guess that was also part of the reason I never spoke about it because this lost dad. And but for years it was never, like I said, I never thought about it. But we weren't close family where I could go and say certain things with my mom. We were always told children mustn't not hurt and these kind of things. And so there were certain topics back then was basically taboo. Even for me now, living in this age, the way I'm trying still today to speak to my children about it, even to have a simple topic or about sex. I mean, I've got a 20-year-old son now, he's turning 21 this year, and still the conversation about sex doesn't come naturally. And I don't want to blame that we didn't get that from our parents, but I also realize it played a huge part because you cannot give people something that you never got yourself.
That's interesting, and it's something that you and I were talking about, Sachaba, and that's how do you engage in some of these conversations? Difficult enough amongst ourselves as grown-ups, but how do we engage young people? How do we engage your children? You know, how do we give them a space sufficiently safe for them to be able to come out and say, "Mom, Dad, this is what's happening to me, or this is what's being threatened. This I'm not comfortable with."
Yeah. So when we started Empower Men, one of the things that we realized was that men were not really prepared for the 21st century dynamics. The way one can frame conversations, the words, the setup. So when we have men-to-men conversation like this, it's part of helping other men to say, this is how I approach the conversation that in the past would have been sensitive for men not to have. And then somebody maybe take the nuggets from there to be able to approach it by just understanding framing and some of the words that one have to use. Even where gender is fluid, for example. At the moment, we might be talking it in a very binary way, male, female. How ready are we as men to discuss gender in a fluid environment? And sometimes, because we don't have the words and the framing, we struggle. So it's conversations like this that just allows it to make it a little bit easier to go into territories where we might feel uncomfortable, but know that other men have been there, and we may look to them to see how they navigated the conversation and how they felt afterwards.
Andre, you mentioned that this is your second public interview since you spoke about this. So what is the conversation that you are having with people around you, or maybe what is the advice that you're giving to fathers out there?
I had a conversation with my sons after this, and then I told him, look here, as much as I love you as a father, but the day a lady or even a boy would come and say, you've touched them inappropriately, I'm going to be the one that takes you to the prison cells and tell them to lock you up. Because the amount of hurt that I've tried to hide or experienced over the last few years since I've spoken has brought me to a place that I'm now a serious activist against any form of sexual abuse because I understand trauma that people are going through. I've even went as far as to go to prisons and say the story in prison because this thing happens in prison like daily, regularly. And you don't get men coming out of prison sharing the story because it's taboo. You don't talk about it. And I remember when I spoke at the prison cells and I spoke to many perpetrators of different kinds. And there was one that stood up, gave me his name and surname and say, Andre, I was raped when I was 8. I went to my dad and told him it was somebody else that did it. And my dad backed me that is a respectable man in our society. It never happened. And if I know what I'm in prison today for rape, I became serial rapist. And there's the thing that scares me up until today, because you would often see that victims become perpetrators. There was a time in my life, and thank God that I didn't do it, but that I was almost drawn into those things. And that is what scares the fact that because you hide what happened to you, it's like it almost justifies why you are doing it. And that's why I'm saying to look here, none of us have an excuse for raping anyone. If a person says, oh, and that is what I'm teaching my son, weekly I would have a conversation now with my daughter and tell her nobody touches your private thoughts. It made me open up more my soul. It made me even when she now brings friends here and I would talk, would have these conversations. Look here, you are little girls. We are living in a dangerous world where we, if I can't trust my own brother, who can we trust? So please be careful. And I might sound paranoid, but for me, prevention is better than cure.
So, Chaba, some absolutely important nuggets that he's sharing.
Definitely. And I think as fathers, as men in society, picking up from those nuggets and appreciating that in this case it's quite traumatic, but making sure that we reflect on what are our wounds that might lead us to be perpetrators and to actually cause harm within the gender-based violence, simply because we haven't dealt with the trauma and we have perhaps chosen to forget it, and yet the way that we live our lives, how we relate, might end up making us to be both a misfit in society or actually doing harm, not really having dealt with the root cause. So one as a man must always assume that they have gone through some trauma that they may not even necessarily be aware of, hence sometimes a toxic expression of masculinity. But I guess whether it's through any process that can allow one to know themselves and what they might have gone through, it will always be a benefit not only to the individual but to society, and society also to appreciate the type of pressures that they put by elevating certain people and then not necessarily making sure that as human beings we are all equal and we need to have that godly experience without prejudice, because that's why we were born, to find expression of our humaneness, and society needs to open up and acknowledge that.
Andre, gonna have to thank you. That's where we're gonna leave the conversation. But we salute you. We congratulate you. We're happy for what you've been able to do to stand up and obviously spread the word and you know all the advocacy that you speak of that you're currently carrying out in your area of influence.
Thank you so much.
So Jabba, thanks so much for coming onto the show. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Andre, for sharing your story. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And that's where we leave this week's edition of Man to Man. I'm your host, Hugo Ribatika. A big thank you to the European Union for making this possible. Remember, let's do better.